Hi, my name is Gabe. I'm a resident of the city of Oxnard, and I'm going to be talking to you about some items that are coming up on the December 3rd City Council meeting agenda. So this agenda has a ton of items on it. I mean, it's a really packed agenda, and the items I'm going to be talking to you about, most of them are really like hot ticket items and would probably have a number of speakers come out to talk on the issue, and also require a lot of deliberation by council members and answering questions by city staff. So it's likely going to be a very long meeting on December 3rd. That being said, this video to break down some of the bigger items is probably going to be a really lengthy video also. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put timestamps in the description of this video down at the bottom here. And if you want to skip right to an item, then you can just go to that time portion on that part of the video and you'll be able to see just that part that you want to see. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to cover is a really big item, and it's something that is very commonly asked about, has been asked about for maybe the last 18 to 24 months, and during that time the city has been studying it closely, and it's in regards to retail cannabis outlets in the city of Oxnard. So what the council is going to be considering is the regulations in the city around the retail cannabis outlets. And they're going with a lot of the kind of state suggested defaults for regulating them. But one of the big things they're going to be deciding on that evening is what's called the buffer zone between sensitive uses. So there's a couple layers to what they have to figure out, and it gets a little complex. So I'm going to try and lay it out as simply as I can here. One is they have to decide what's going to be considered a sensitive use. So sensitive use right now in the state definition is any place that is a place where youth might naturally congregate. So that would be like a school, a park or playground, or a youth center. What was brought up at the Housing and Economic Development Committee meeting was why churches are not included as a sensitive use. So the city council is going to have to decide, do they want to include churches in the definition of sensitive uses in the city of Oxnard, meaning you cannot have a cannabis retail outlet within X number of feet from a sensitive use such as a school, park, playground, or youth center, or a church. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is what I mentioned, the buffer distance, meaning should it be 500 feet, 600 feet, 1,000 feet from these sensitive uses? If they establish one of these locations, how far should it be from these types of areas? The state default or the state minimum is 600 feet, which is also the amount of feet that an alcohol establishment needs to be from the same sensitive uses. As you can see on the maps provided by the planning department, they have to decide between 6 different scenarios. In addition to the distances, they have to decide, is it going to be 500 feet inclusive of churches or not inclusive of churches, 600 feet with or without churches, and 1,000 feet with or without churches. So as you can see, there's a lot of moving parts to this decision. There's people who are likely going to come out and speak to the item, as well as potential business owners. And the idea behind this is that the city council is going to be telling staff, this is what, after all of this work that's been done, this is what we're hearing from input from the community and what should be considered for the regulations for cannabis outlets in the city of Oxnard. One thing I think is worth pointing out is that 600 feet, as you may recall, is the minimum distance that alcohol establishments have to be from these youth-sensitive locations. That being said, within the city of Oxnard, there is a very high density of alcohol outlets, and almost every single one of them follows that state minimum and is at least 600 feet from any of those types of locations. And yet there's still a high density of outlets around these areas, especially in the neighborhoods that are low income or are communities of color. And I'm not trying to sway your thoughts on that one way or the other. I'm just trying to point out that 600 feet is the established minimum already for alcohol outlets, and yet over many decades, high density has happened in some communities, but not in others. So beyond the decision about the buffer zone distance and whether or not to include religious institutions as part of the definition for sensitive uses, the staff also talks about their work in looking at a social equity model that would happen within the city which is still ongoing. That won't be decided on at this on the December 3rd council meeting. And they're also recommending that the city council consider going forward with the best practices as outlined by the state agencies. And most other cities that have already implemented some kind of retail cannabis outlets have followed those, and they're pretty good and pretty robust. As far as the financial impact, there's nothing stated in the staff report about hard numbers, how much they project will come from the retail cannabis outlets. However, it's been estimated in the past that the city would bring in about $3 million a year from all cannabis activities. That's manufacturing, distribution, testing, and retail establishments. The next item I'm covering is a huge item that has gone to numerous neighborhood council meetings, has come before city council committee, and is now going to the city council again for another public hearing, and that is around short-term rentals. So I haven't covered short-term rentals much in my previous videos, but I've been following it as it's come along in all the different meetings and city council meetings and other things. And there's a lot of people who feel very strongly on both sides of the issue. It sounds like what they came up with at November 5th public hearing is really a nice kind of medium between the people who live in the communities that are mostly affected by this and those who are the property owners who want to use their property as short-term rentals. So the item that's going to be at the December 3rd City Council meeting is a result of the previous public hearing on November 5th, and they're looking at some resident input and council's direction to staff to revise some parts of the ordinance. The first part of the ordinance is going to be modified and proposed on December 3rd is in regards to a 200-foot separation between STRs, meaning that two short-term rentals cannot be any closer than 200 feet from one another. The next revision is in regards to amplified sound or just loud music or loud noise coming from a short-term rental. And essentially what they're doing is they're saying that they have to comply with the existing sound regulations that everybody else has to comply with. The next portion is in regards to the communities at the Colony at Mandalay Beach and the Harbor Island condominiums, which are not eligible to receive STR permits. Lastly, they're adding an exemption for timeshares from the 200-foot separation requirement and from the annual cap of 100 days for short-term rentals in any one dwelling. So they've already discussed this numerous times, as I mentioned before, and for this public hearing, it's in regards to what's being proposed just in the modifications that came from the previous public hearing, and that's what they're looking to pass on December 3rd. So there are actually 3 ordinances that are comprising the different regulations that apply to short-term rentals. One is for the non-coastal areas, one is for the coastal areas, and one is in regards to the fine structure that will happen when people are not in compliance with the short-term rentals regulations. So if you look at the financial impact section on the staff report, you'll find that between the actual permit cost for the short-term rentals, the business tax license that is annually charged to the dwelling, to the fines that they anticipate will happen from people who are not in compliance with the regulations, and from the transient occupancy tax that they will impose on each of these dwellings. They're estimating that they'll probably bring in around $800,000 annually from having better regulations of short-term rentals. Now, of course, this is the type of issue where you're never going to make everybody happy. And so the idea behind this is that these regulations are in place in order to kind of help the communities who have had concerns raised about short-term rentals being in their community, mostly in the beach neighborhoods. And it will allow them to be able to have some kind of footing to stand upon when they report to Oxnard PD for any troublesome parcels that are causing issues because of the short-term rental tenants. On the flip side, it does give the people who own those properties some kind of guidelines in what they're doing and who they should be renting to, and giving some very clear expectations of their renters when they're out at their properties. So now I'm going to go over an item that I don't think has gotten the attention that it truly deserves. So this is in regards to the Downtown Improvement Program Settlement Funds. And just real quickly, the idea behind these funds is that when the movie theater was built at the Collection in River Park. There was a dispute between the city and the developer, and what ended up happening was they settled on $6.1 million to go to the city to help mitigate any kind of negative financial impact that the downtown area would see because of the movie theater built at the Collection. The idea behind these settlement funds was now that they are able to use them in downtown, they need to figure out what are they going to use it for and how are they going to use it to improve and revitalize the area. You may have heard about the murals that are going to be painted in downtown, and those are the $90,000 is coming out of this downtown settlement fund. So it's no secret that downtown Oxnard needs a lot of work. So looking at these settlement funds, the city staff is trying to figure out what they're calling a multi-pronged approach to revitalizing downtown Oxnard. Essentially, they want to start by addressing the impact from homelessness and vagrancy, seek private investors to develop parts of the area, create a clean and safe environment, and create a vibrant downtown environment. So as you'll see from the staff presentation on the evening of the item, there's a lot of stuff that's going on and is currently in the queue for downtown that's going to help move towards this goal of revitalizing the area. So on that evening, what they're asking for is an appropriation from the City Council of $540,000 to allow them to get things started in a couple of different areas. So you may have heard that the Housing Department is looking to assemble an outreach team to address homelessness throughout the entire city. They want to use $100,000 from these settlement funds to be able to have dedicated staff who will focus solely on the downtown area. They want to reach out to the homeless people and to the encampments in downtown to offer them resources, including like counseling or a transition into more permanent shelter and get off of the streets. They're also looking to demolish the laundromat that's located on 5th Street between B and C Streets. That'll cost about $195,000 to demolish it, and then they don't want to leave it vacant for long. What they want to do is demolish it so that people won't break into it anymore. There won't be calls for service there. I think it's been set on fire a couple of times too. So they want it to be nothing, and then they want to make it temporarily, maybe like a public art gallery or something that could be used temporarily until they decide what they're going to do with that parcel. They're also asking to appropriate $65,000 to improve the lighting and the downtown parking structure. The next request is in regards to Oxnard Police Department presence within the downtown area. According to the staff report, years ago they had a lot more officer presence in downtown, but as other areas of the city were developed, they didn't increase the number of officers who were employed by the police department or that were dedicated to downtown, and instead those officers who were downtown were just kind of reassigned to other areas of the city. As it stands now, there's probably 2 regular officers who are assigned to the downtown area, and so they're asking to be able to fund more overtime to allow a greater officer presence. I think it said about 40 hours more per week to have someone there more often and be able to respond to issues right away. In the staff report, they also state that paying overtime for officers is actually more cost efficient than just hiring additional officers. The reason being, according to the report, that you can actually be very directed with overtime in when it's available, what times a day, or what days of the week that you want an officer to work more hours. Lastly, they're looking to add additional funding of $30,000 annually to a consultant they have who's working with them to help revitalize the downtown area rather than hiring a person to do that work for the city. So as you can see here, for fiscal year 1920, they're requesting $540,000 to implement all of those items that I just discussed. In the course of 3 years, the total programming will come out to $1.6 million. The last item I'm going to be covering is the proposal to ban flavored tobacco products in the city of Oxnard. So as a disclosure on this item, I'm actually going to be presenting part of this item to the City Council. For those who don't know, I'm actually a health educator, and city staff attended one of the community meetings that I was presenting at where I was talking about the latest updates around the issue of vaping and youth. So at the request of the city staff, they asked if I would be willing to come out and do an educational kind of foundational piece for the city council before the city staff presents the ordinance. So I do want to make it clear I'm not being paid by the city to provide that presentation that evening. It's something that I would do anyways in the regular course of my job if there was any request from any city or school district entity for me to come out and do that presentation. I just want to make it clear that my portion of the presentation is not going to be asking them to vote one way or the other, but rather it's just to give some foundational info for them so when they hear about the ordinance, they have a little bit more information in order to base their decision on, in addition to what they hear from residents on the item. So the ordinance that's being proposed is looking at banning any kind of flavored tobacco products from being sold within the city. This would include not only the sweet flavored vaping juices that you hear about in the news, but it would also include like cigarillos, it would include menthol cigarettes, include any kind of flavored tobacco product. You may have heard of other jurisdictions that have already banned flavored tobacco products, and the reason for this tends to be because with young people, they find that they either start using tobacco products or they continue to use them because of the availability and the access to the flavored products. Therefore, if they were discontinued and there was no longer access to those products, they would likely not use them or would drastically cut down the number of young people who use them because the flavors are available. There are a couple other components to this ordinance, but that's the really big one, is the flavors part of it. They also have like minimum packaging sizes and a few other items that are specific to the retail establishments. So I invite you to take a look at the staff report and the ordinance and see what you think about it. All right, so those are the really big items that are coming up on the December 3rd City Council meeting. I hope you got a lot from this video. If you have any questions, put them down in the comments. Otherwise, I thank you for watching as always, and I'll see you next time.